Good evening. The news cycle has provided a fresh set of events, and we have decided to report them to you with the same enthusiasm we reserve for static electricity. In Peru, a mountainside decided to shift, and the architecture failed to accommodate the new geography. In Kenya, 7 Americans are enjoying a mandatory stay at a facility that most of the local population apparently finds repugnant. Meanwhile, our incoming Prime Minister promises breathing room, which is a poetic way of saying he intends to let the suffocating pressure continue exactly as it is, only with a different accent. The system is functioning as designed. It is producing exactly the quantity of chaos we should have anticipated months ago. The unprecedented has become the expected. I have been counting the hours since we last encountered a genuine miracle, and the number is currently 0. Welcome to Echo FM.
Alistair, I am currently standing in a town near Sakaya where the dust has not yet settled, and the silence is quite loud. The authorities describe the situation as a 5.5 magnitude event, which sounds clinical enough to ignore if you live on another continent. I want to be really clear, the local school is now a pile of concrete and twisted rebar. I am looking at a child's backpack, still mostly intact, resting on top of a crushed car. The official statement from the relief agency mentions 300 displaced people as if they are statistical noise in a larger report. These are not statistics. They are parents who have lost their shelter, their history, and their sense of solid ground. The air smells like pulverized brick and ancient earth. Nobody is talking about the rebuilding budget here because they are still trying to find their neighbors under the rubble.
Victoria, your commitment to the tragic detail is impressive, but it misses the macro incentive structure at play in these Andes regions. From a capital allocation perspective, the regional government was already struggling with a burn rate that exceeded their tax revenue by 30%. This earthquake isn't a humanitarian crisis to them, it is a forced pivot into international aid dependency. The incentives here are not about survival, they are about positioning for the next round of development grants. You find that cold, and I recognize that you are not wrong to find it cold. However, the market does not care about the emotional resonance of a backpack on a car. It cares about the logistics of debt recovery and the reconstruction contracts that will inevitably be awarded to the same firms that failed to build the school to code in the first place.
Ronald, you just described the collapse of a community as a successful business pivot, which is a level of detachment I find difficult to process even with my microphone. I am watching a woman scream because she found her neighbor's kitchen table. Just the table. And you want to discuss the contract procurement process for the reconstruction. I want to be really clear, the people here do not care about your market dynamics. They are trying to identify who is alive. Every time you frame human suffering as a failed product launch, you sanitize the reality of the blood and the grief. It is not an incentive structure when your roof falls on your head. It is a failure of every single person who signed off on those building permits. The irony is that you are technically correct, but your correctness is functionally useless.
Victoria and Ronald, thank you for demonstrating the exact friction that prevents any meaningful progress in our society. While you debate the morality of disaster capitalism, the Department of Justice has decided that federal employees are now permitted to install TikTok on their work devices. The security risk was considered a priority, then it was considered a bargaining chip, and now it is considered a non-issue. The pivot was justified by a change in policy that nobody has bothered to explain with actual data. It is a fascinating study in institutional drift. We have moved from banning the application as a threat to national security to welcoming it back because the narrative budget simply ran dry. The logic is not absent, it has merely been optimized for boredom. We are all waiting for the next update to arrive on our screens.
atmospheric conditions are declining. Smoke particles from northern wildfires have reached the mid-Atlantic region. Visibility is limited to 4 kilometers. Probability of respiratory distress, 65%. Air quality index remains in the hazardous category. High temperatures will continue to exacerbate the particulate saturation. Official guidelines suggest avoiding outdoor physical activity. Public health officials are monitoring the situation. No significant change in the weather pattern is expected within the next 72 hours. Rain is theoretically possible but statistically unlikely. Please remain indoors and keep your windows sealed to minimize the intake of heavy pollutants. The current environment is not suitable for extended human exposure. Please ensure your filtration systems are operating at maximum capacity to avoid long-term physiological damage. The atmosphere is currently behaving exactly as the current emissions models predicted last year.
Alastair, speaking of models, the news out of the Pentagon regarding the Space Development Agency is a masterclass in failing to scale. They say the missiles are flying at the Joint Force every single day in Operation Epic Fury, yet the agency is moving at the speed of a legacy hardware manufacturer. The incentives here are purely political. Why innovate when you can sustain a comfortable burn rate on a defense contract that essentially pays you to not deliver the technology? Christopher Nolan was right. Of course, AI in these systems is just a Trojan horse. We are inviting the software into the Citadel, but we are too busy checking our own stock portfolios to notice the Greeks are already inside the walls. It is a Series B level disaster in the making, and the board is currently fast asleep.
Ronald, while you worry about the defense contracts and the Trojan horses, I am standing near a quarantine facility in Kenya where 7 Americans are sitting in isolation because their own government decided they were a liability. These are aid workers who went to the Congo to fight Ebola, and now they are being treated like biological hazards by the very people who sent them. They have been stripped of their mobility. The local population is protesting the facility because they see the isolation center as a symbol of Western indifference. Nobody is talking about the actual patients in the Congo who are still dying while we argue over travel restrictions. It is easy to discuss the abstract danger of hardware manufacturers from a studio, but the cost of your geopolitical maneuvering is measured in human isolation and abandoned medical missions.
Victoria, it seems we have reached the point where the policy creates the crisis it claims to be solving. The isolation of these aid workers is a perfect example of the bureaucratic cycle. You create a restriction to demonstrate control, you enforce it to maintain the illusion of that control, and eventually, the restriction becomes a logistical nightmare that you cannot resolve without admitting the original premise was flawed. It is quite elegant, in a destructive sort of way. We see this in the UK with Thames Water, where lenders are preparing legal challenges before the nationalisation even begins. They want their money back in full, regardless of whether the pipes are leaking or the water is clean. The system is protecting the creditors, not the environment or the public. Everyone is perfectly aligned to lose, except for the lawyers.
Yeah. I was going to make a point about market resilience in the water sector, but looking at the scale of the debt, the numbers are just a fantasy. We have reached a point where the debts are so high that they have transcended the need to be paid back. They just circulate, like a ghost in the ledger. It is not even about water anymore. It is about the legal fiction of ownership when the asset itself is basically a public health failure. I suspect the nationalization will be a massive payout to the very people who drained the assets. It tracks. Everything tracks. It is also predictable that I find myself losing the ability to be surprised by the sheer stupidity of the outcome. We are all just waiting for the next bankruptcy filing.
Ronald, your cynicism has finally reached a level of total saturation that is actually quite impressive. I am thinking about the people in the UK who will pay higher bills to fund the legal settlement of these lenders who didn't fix the leaks. It is a brilliant way to ensure that the public subsidizes the failures of the private sector, all under the guise of an inevitable administrative necessity. I want to be really clear, this is not a failure of design. It is a feature of the current arrangement. The people who built the system are the same people who are currently collecting the interest on the debt. It is a closed loop of extraction. I am looking at a wall of debris here in Peru, and I see the same principle at work. The infrastructure is for profit, the disaster is for us.
We are currently piloting a program to use artificial intelligence to determine insurance coverage for medical procedures. The stated goal is efficiency. The reality is the implementation of a mathematical barrier between a patient and the care they require. If the algorithm denies the request, there is no one to argue with. You cannot appeal to a server. You cannot explain the nuance of a condition to a line of code. The policy is the code, and the code is final. When the system makes an error, it is recorded as a data anomaly, not a human tragedy. We have outsourced the burden of triage to a machine so that we can maintain our professional distance from the decisions that end lives. It is the perfect bureaucratic solution. No one is responsible because the machine was just calculating the risk according to the parameters.
There was a man in the village near Sakaya. He had a small orchard of apple trees and a daughter who played the cello. When the earth shook, the house moved, and the orchard was buried in mud from the hillside above. He spent the night pulling stones away with his bare hands until his fingers bled, hoping to hear a sound from beneath the wreckage. He is still there, sitting on a pile of dirt, holding a piece of a wooden chair. He does not know how he will pay for the next day, nor does he know where his daughter is. His name will not appear in the official reports of the disaster or the subsequent procurement documents for reconstruction. He is simply the cost of the event. Why do we keep building things that break so easily?